Yeah. Hello, everyone. Hi, we have a webinar on opportunities in public international law. We have with us Shriya Meni, who's an advocate in Supreme Court and currently working with the United Nations. So, Shriya, please take over.
Hi, good morning, Garima. Hello, everyone. You'd all have to bear with a slightly slurry and sleepy me, for I've rather had a very work-dipped week. Feel free to ask me questions, anything under the sun to do with the caption topic, and I'd be delighted to share my experiences with you all. I'm sure Garima has captured your queries beautifully for me today to answer. First, let me briefly introduce myself. I'm currently working at the United Nations Legal Division under the president of the Mechanism for International Criminal Tribunals. It's abbreviated as the MICT, and I'm working at the Hague branch. There are two branches of the MICT. One is stationed at Arusha and the other is at Hague. So I'm here at the Hague branch. I'm on a 3-month project basically. To begin with, it's been the best 2 weeks of my life almost that I landed in the Netherlands. I must admit these have been perhaps the most extremely engaging and interesting weeks of my life, and people at the organization are lovely to work with. So basically, I'm an advocate practicing at the Supreme Court of India, Delhi High Court, and the district courts at New Delhi. I specialize in dispute resolution, focusing on civil and criminal litigation, family and property law matters at length. After completing my bachelor's from Gujarat National Law University, I joined the Litigation and Arbitration Department of erstwhile Shardul Amarchand Mangaldas and Suresh Shroff, New Delhi, as an associate in their dispute resolution team. I then pursued the BCL program, which is the Bachelor of Civil Laws, on a full scholarship. It was indeed a very generous fund or grant, as I can say, which was given by Senior Advocate Mr. Salve. And I obtained a master's in law thereon from the University of Oxford. And I majored in international crime, to be very specific. So I studied a mixed bag of subjects. I did 2 commercial law subjects and 2 criminal law subjects. Both were international law based. As a recipient of the Oxford Global Justice Award 2015 for Public International Law, I'm currently working at the United Nations, The Hague, as I told you, since 2nd of Jan 2016. I basically assist the president of the MICT. It's actually a UN court of law dealing with war crimes that took place during the Balkans in the 1990s. And as an international law expert from India, what I basically do on a daily basis at the tribunal is this. I attend tribunal hearings, I prepare witness statements, memos, briefs, researches for the president judge. I draft daily assignment orders, sentencing and scheduling orders for ongoing criminal matters, whether in trial or appeal for that matter. The accused whose trials I deal with on a pretty much a daily basis are actually the heads of various nations of the Balkans in the 1990s. So it's very interesting an area to actually deal with. And as I take you through all these options that are perhaps available for all young law, international law enthusiasts, I will share more information about how I got my job and what exactly does my work entail. However, you might have to deal with a slightly anonymous description and where I don't take the names of the accused or the countries because I'm bound by severe confidential obligations at the United Nations. So for these are all ongoing trials, like I told you, whether sitting in appeal or serving sentence under the supervision of the MICT at The Hague. So from what I understand, the topic of this session pertains to any and all opportunities that might be available for you. And I will try and give you a brief overview of all this as the interview progresses.
So, tell us, what is public international law?
So prior to answering your question as to what exactly is public international law, from what I understand, most young lawyers, including me, we believe that these opportunities are latent or they are hidden. And I say this because of the very reason that we sit here on a webinar as to whether these opportunities of employment available in the field of international law so-called exist or not, and how prevalent are they. So this unerringly hints towards a plausible lacuna or a gapping, if I may say so. Coming back to your question now, public international law studies legal interactions and exchanges among different actors across state borders. So I use the word actors here and not states because specifically in my job as well, I deal with criminals or accused who have absolutely nothing to do with aspects of state responsibility when it comes to prosecuting them for crimes of genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes perhaps. So while there are no prerequisites, international law binds usefully upon the basic understanding of a state, government, sovereignty, power, conflict, and these encountered by students in social sciences, philosophicals, legal subjects, and extend these foundations to the international sphere in a distinctive way. The theorists and practitioners of public international law have built this field in response to both international politics and domestic law. So what I'm trying to explain is that this field is very interdisciplinary. Procedurally, you learn a lot of things in international law, which you can substantively relate to a lot of other laws as well that you probably would have studied in your domestic countries. Public international law means, in a gist, the set of rules governing international relations between public bodies such as states, international organizations, and conventions and uniform laws are common instruments of public international law. Public international law has in fact increased in use and importance vastly over the 20th century due to increase in global trade, environmental deterioration on a pretty much worldwide scale, awareness of human rights violations, rapid and very vast increases in international transportation, and a boom in global communications. So being an international lawyer is in fact one of the most hot and prevalent things that's happening around the globe at the moment.
So, Shreya, what are the kinds of opportunities available?
Right. So I think that's a very good question to begin with. I think as a lawyer dealing with public international law, you have a variety of options to pick from, which a lot of people, in fact, do not consider or even know about to start with when we're in law school, because all we're taught is we have to get into a law firm after we finish 5 years of law school, and that's about it. And international law is just soft law. It makes no sense. But I think when you actually come and practice this aspect and field of law, and I speak out of sheer experience and nothing, I think it's a very vast ocean, which is in fact being carved out. So the best part about this law is that it's in fact being carved out. So you can be in that stage of literally culling or making the law if you join the public international law sphere right now. So coming back to your question, I think a brilliant way to find a career opportunity foothold abroad is internships. So and I think it's pretty fair an aspect as well from an employer's perspective who has absolutely no idea about your modalities of working and even capabilities. I think it's a very sensible requirement to make. So I think the first option that you have after you study public international law is academia. So researching, publishing, teaching, having studied higher degrees, usually a doctorate, etc., in international law specialism, I would say this is one of the best options to secure a tight footing in the field of PIL. You would be surprised to know that when I blogged about my views on the Dala case in arbitration, dealing with some very contentious issues of international commercial arbitration, many known arbitrators wrote back to me on the blog. And this was a very good way to begin interacting with people from the legal circuit. I think this also encourages academics from different colleges to interact with each other. For instance, when I was majoring in international crime at Oxford, my professor, Mr. Akande, he would often blog about his thoughts on a blog called EJIL Talk. And in fact, you should all go have a look at this if you're interested in PIL and international law and armed conflicts and international criminal law. Gradually, I too started sharing my views. So as a budding Indian law student on practically international law and armed conflicts vis-a-vis India, I had a good start. So I think this is one way to kind of find a foothold if you're planning to look for being a public international lawyer. I think the second is actually being a PIL lawyer. So a practicing solicitor or a barrister or an attorney in any country working in a relevant practice area of international law. And this would just not mean international criminal law, which I specialize in, but it could also be a lot of other areas like mergers and acquisitions, which are actually cross and interdisciplinary measures of putting international law practically into a substantive law. It's very viable because a lot of firms in the UK, and I say this out of experience, are looking for viable Indian candidates to work on issues of arbitration, cross-border transactions and mergers, because a lot of Indian parties and Indian laws are being involved in such transactions. A lot of European countries afloat tons of internship, but most of them are actually for EU nationals. But it's a very good idea to keep track of these internships because they can actually put you in a position where you intern with a UK law firm. For instance, there is an internship project with 3 Crowns. It is an LLP that works in London, and it's a brilliant way to actually work as a public international lawyer because all they do is public international law and international commercial arbitration. And they are very, very friendly when it comes to inviting Indian candidates to come and intern with them for 3 months. It is in fact a paid internship, and after 3 months, they actually consider whether they can give you an offer or a job by the end of it. So that's a brilliant way to start from if you want to look at becoming a public international lawyer, I think. There's, of course, a third option, which is about paralegals and legal assistants, which is also a very good way for Indian candidates who haven't taken the bar at the UK or the US for that matter to actually start from when it comes to opportunities in public international law. So I think supporting lawyers in their work who are already practicing in public international law, such as drafting documents, collecting and analyzing and summarizing information on PIL, could go on to study perhaps even a chartered legal executive to become a free earner at some point. I think this is pretty popular in international criminal law as well these days, because with the ICTY and the MICT downsizing and their scheduling to completely close down by 2017, I think efficient Asian lawyers are being looked at as very good work staff, and they are being encouraged and preferred over as locals for their sheer hard work and motivation. And I say this out of experience because I do see a lot of Asian staff, preferably not Indian, and that's why I would like a lot of more Indian students to apply at The Hague. But I think it's a very good start. The fourth option that I suggest could also be a project officer or an assistant, which is closely linked to what I said earlier, but you put an NGO or an intergovernmental body. So I think providing administrative, project management, or fieldwork support to these intergovernmental bodies, like for instance, I can give you an example that the United Nations has a young professional program. It's called the YPP, and if you just Google it, you can just find out about how the UN actually offers paid internships or volunteerships to students to come and work with them. And I think it's a brilliant way for an Asian lawyer who has some base in international law to go worldwide and global and figure out, even if it's perhaps ranging from awareness campaigns or research work to direct support for refugees, etc. So that's a very good start again, I think. There's a very niche area which is coming up, which is quite interesting in this field, which is that of policy advisors and analysts. So even if you're not exactly from a legal background, but you've done something to do with policy making, I think it's a very good idea to apply to public international law bodies, because they're looking for Asian lawyers when it comes to making policies for situations in Turkey, Syria, and how to counter the ICs. So apart from a very legal perspective, they're also looking for a very humanitarian perspective, and I think that can come from a lot of policy studies which people have done, or perhaps even economics which people have done in other disciplines. So I think that's a very good place when it comes to public international law opportunities as well. So policy and political agendas, basically very interesting yet again, I feel. Of course. And then there is the very conventional answer, which should have been my first to go to in this seminar, but I think I just wanted to give you a brief overview of other things, which are the intergovernmental organizations, which is the United Nations organizations, which I basically deal with, and of course other organizations as well. So just to give you a brief overview, there is of course an African Union which offers jobs and internships under the tab of opportunities on their website, which is again very useful. There is the Council of Europe traineeships, which are very useful again. There are European Parliament and Commission traineeships, which are in fact being publicized also. I think there are a couple of Indian blogs also who are doing a very good job giving funding, and I think Loctopus also did this a couple of weeks back, where they've offered money to actually people to go and fundings for people to go and work outside of the European Commission should they get a training. There is of course the Council of European Union. There's the Court of Justice of EU. There is, of course, the Organization of American States for Security and Cooperation in Europe, which have abundant internships available. So don't fear that there are not enough or sufficient opportunities. I think it's just about spending some time researching, finding it out if there are opportunities available. So like I said, there is the YPP, which is basically a very interesting UN internship and volunteer role program, which is in fact paid. And it's basically a very nice jump for you to directly become a trial attorney or a legal officer at the UN, which is really, really hard. So you must find a solid foothold via a deputation synth as a P1 or an intern like I did. So I will just brief you through how you do this. So basically what you do is that there is an Inspira portal on which you can make your applications for these YPP. And when Garima asks me more questions about how I landed the job, or maybe how I did go about this, I can like elaborate in more detail to you guys about it. But I think this is how you can start with. Just get onto the Inspira portal and apply for whatever UN jobs are available and internships are available. That is very helpful. Just to also give you a brief overview, World Trade Organization also has some internships. So I have a friend who interned there for 6 months at the WTO after completing her master's from University of George Washington, and she received a permanent internship thereafter. And she worked for about 6 more months or 8 more months, and now she's worked on various public procurement law issues, and she dealt with cross-border procurements, and she's working there now quite happily. So you don't need to also realize and keep in mind before I dwell deeper into this, that there are no permanent jobs at the UN. You always have contractual employments. So it is all a very work-based system. If you work well for 6 months, they extend your contract by another 6 months. If you work well for 2 years, it's another 2 years. So everything is very meritorious and work-based, which is nothing like India, but I think it's a wonderful opportunity to start from, because of the fact that you will never face the wrath of discrimination or power play here. There is also a very interesting internship of 1 year, which is available with the International Court of Justice. And this is a very good place to start from. From my limited knowledge, I know that the National University of Singapore offers this kind of internship, and there are a few Indian universities as well. And I think GNLU also has been offered, where the ICJ has offered traineeships, and they can nominate their own college students for these. So these are very interesting studentships that are available. So if you're nominating institution like your university, for instance, the NUS or the GNLU or any other law school has a tie-up with ICJ, sorry, and ICJ invites a particular number of law schools every year. So this is a very good place to start from. You can keep an eye and keep a tab on whether your law school is included in that list. And if it is, then you can just apply that particular year. And this is a funded internship for 1 year. So it's an excellent way to start from. The only caveat here is that knowledge of French and English is necessary. So you have to be very careful that you learn a knowledge, which we'll definitely discuss, a language, sorry, which we'll definitely discuss once the webinar progresses. And last but not the least, the place where I work is the International Criminal Court and the ICTY and the MIC tribunals. These have abundant internships that are available. So if you're able to secure funding, if you're able to secure scholarships, I think this is the best place to work at, because international criminal law is in its nascent stage. It is not a defined or carved law as yet. So they are culling out the law and making the law. So you're actually going to be a part of history and jurisprudence when it comes to making the law. So the tribunals offer internships for 3 to 6 months, and it's definitely possible to get funding. I received my funding for the deputation at the ICTY from the University of Oxford from a very generous donor known as Mr. Trenchard, and he was very, very nice. He came to the university, spoke to us, and we had a proper application program for the Global Justice Award. I applied and had an interview, and here I am now. So I think life is very unexpected as a public international law person, and you can just land up on anywhere on the globe at any point in time, and you wouldn't know how and why. And it's very exciting for me now, because I wake up and I walk into meetings and I associate groups of very sensitive countries, like perhaps the Association of Victims from Bosnia and Herzegovina, and I've always read about this in history. So I think public international law has ample opportunities. You just have to find it.
So, what are the minimum qualifications required, Shreya?
Okay, so that's again a very pertinent question. I think to work as a public international lawyer, what you usually need is this, and I'm going to be very crisp about this. The first one is that you qualify as a lawyer in a legal jurisdiction. That is your bachelor's degree. Second is a master's degree is extremely important. So if you have a master's in international law, public international law specifically, there are a lot of people who also do private international law and work gradually in the field of public international law, but I think it's slightly difficult to understand the subject if you haven't read it in detail for a couple of months at the law school level. So definitely a bachelor's as well as a specialized master's in either general public international law, or if you are very focused in maybe international commercial arbitration or international criminal law specifically with a PIL aspect, would do great wonders. So that's the first. I think the second is the relevant language skills, and I must admit, knowledge of French or Spanish is extremely helpful. So we must keep in mind that most of the public international law courts, which are situated in Europe or the States, and especially and specifically Europe, actually deal with French as a synonymous concomitant language when it comes to English. So knowledge of French is extremely important. And I just don't say reading knowledge of French, but I think fluent or comprehensive knowledge is very helpful. Even Spanish is a very good language to start from. So I think these are two languages which are if even if you don't have very great working knowledge of it, at least a very brief knowledge of being conversant. For instance, I can converse in French. So I think that helps, you give you an added edge over the others and puts you at par with the other Europeans. So you don't feel like an expat or somebody from the outside who's walked into Europe. I think the third is the relevant international experience. So I think a minimum, I wouldn't say that this is a minimum criteria or a entry level criteria, but I think it's a very helpful criteria. And for any Asian lawyer who's looking to succeed long term, gaining foothold in the field of public international law abroad in organizations like the UN, etc., I think it's a very important criteria. I think it's extremely important to have good international experience, like overseas as a part of a training contract, maybe. For instance, like I described, the YPP program of the United Nations is a traineeship with an intergovernmental body and possibly gives you ample experience as well. So a master's law degree, an LLM, BCL or MJUR in a relevant area can be helpful, particularly for academic or EU roles, but this can be substituted for by relevant professional experiences for those that move later into these areas. So I think that's kind of substitutable. If you don't have a master's, go for good international law experiences like trainings or internships, etc. Last but not the least, I think of critical importance is the ability to enhance and demonstrate one's independent research skills. So you must very, very importantly understand that whenever you have talked about international law opportunities for law students, the first kind of work that you will be faced with is research, is drafting, basically a footnote, side check or spell check, and the foreigners love detail. So I think if you are detailed in your approach, that's an excellent way to start from. This is of key interest to international law employers, especially within the PIL sector. So I think it's extremely important to be very focused and detailed in your research, understand the research proposition, and you would be expected to make memorandums on a daily basis. So I think one of the most important requirements for entry to me personally would be excellent research skills and very good drafting nuances and an eye for detail when it comes to cite and spell checks. Go ahead, Garima.
Yeah. So since you mentioned that LLM is required, so do they prefer a foreign LLM or an Indian LLM also does?
That's a very interesting question. I don't have experiences of Indian LLM lawyers working outside much, but I would love to see them working. But I think, like I said, a foreign LLM just gives you a little more weightage because everywhere outside they know that particular university. So for instance, if I come from the University of Cambridge, Oxford, Harvard, or probably even UCL, King's, they know these names. They know that there is a reputation, a good reputation of these universities. The only predicament that Indian universities face is that we are not very well known outside on the globe. So I think as much as we may be very good in our teaching modalities and we may be excellent with how our students turn out and at par or perhaps even better than the students who are educated abroad, but I think what's important is that the marketing is a bit low. So definitely, I mean, in hindsight, out of sheer experience, I will suggest that a foreign LLM is definitely better. But like I said, you can substitute an Indian LLM with good internships, again, a foreign LLM. So if you have good international experience after doing an international law degree from an Indian law school, I think that can very well substitute a foreign LLM. So if that clarifies your answer or question.
Yeah, it does, Shreya. So I want to know that, like, in the law school, what kind of, so if I'm in the law school and my aim is that I need to get into the public international sector, what kind of internship should I start focusing on since the beginning, like from the very first year?
Okay, that's quite a very broad-based question, but I will try and answer it as specifically as I can. I think if I was you and I had to do that, though I did not think like this when I was in the first year, but if I had to think exactly like this person has, I think in my first year, I would have tried a hand at everything. I think I would have experienced how the courts work. I think I would have gone to a law firm. I think I would have studied PIL, and I would have just figured for myself whether I really want to do this A to begin with or not, and what it really entails and has. B, I think what's very important is read Malcolm Shaw and Brownlee top to bottom. Those are two books that you should know by heart when it comes to public international law. So I'll again repeat that for you all. Malcolm Shaw, it's a fat green book. which is excellent. It has an e-copy available as well. And the other one is Ian Brownlee. He's an excellent commentator. Read Shaw first and then Brownlee. I think these are two brilliant authorities which will be quoted every now and then in the PIL sphere. So that's tip number B. When you're done with these two things, I think the kind of internships, like you asked, I would focus on if I was such a person. I think I would definitely try and keep applying to international law organizations outside. Like I said, that I would apply for these YPP programs. It's okay to get rejected. Okay, so my professor once said this, and I would like to share this with you. He said the number of rejections don't matter, the number of acceptance do. So even if you get one letter of acceptance of a job application, it doesn't matter if you had 100 rejections. So I would definitely start applying right from the beginning of my second or third year to all these organizations. A lot of them are very generous when it comes to giving feedback as well. So if you hound them or pester them a bit with emails, successive emails, they will also give you a feedback as to where you are lacking. So you can know that, you perhaps lacking in a master's degree or a foreign language. But I can be very sure about this, that I would definitely, as a fourth thing, also learn a foreign language right from my first year. So I will definitely learn French or Spanish maybe. And in my fourth year, definitely apply for an international master's. I think this is a perfect recipe to becoming an international lawyer when it comes to dealing with PIL abroad or maybe at the UN or any career opportunity for that matter. So right from the first year, I'll just sum it up for you. I would definitely apply for internships, like you said, to all these places. I've explained to you what those internships are, but if you want, I can just reiterate for you. So apply to the United Nations, apply to any European Union or American organizations like WTO, any of the organizations which offer internships like 3 Crowns, etc., which are commercial, but they have a PIL aspect, which is extremely good because it gives you a very broad-based overview of the things. And of course, learn a foreign language and apply for your foreign masters in due course. So I think these are 4-5 things right from the first year. If you do, I think you should be fine in your 5th year.
Thank you for the answer, Shreya. Do we require any kind of recommendation letters for these internships or for the job, or any sort of recommendations do we need?
Okay, so that's a very good question, I think. And it's extremely important and very important that we have good recommendation letters in place. This is, in fact, the most important criteria, even more than your grades, because everything outside works on a word of mouth and network. So if you have a good recommendation from somebody who's established abroad as a public international law figure, you will definitely be able to grab the job, even if you're sitting with 10 other Europeans or Americans in the list. So I must admit, all the work that you may get outside is based on the word of mouth, like I said. So grab recommendations, as many as you can, from your professors, academics, and of course, professional referees. It's a very good idea if you're working in a law firm or interning in a law firm which does international law work. Definitely take, recommendations saying that you have worked on an international law deal, that you were working on a live international law transaction that was perhaps a cross-border merger or an acquisition. And I think even though it's commercial law, it can really go places in helping you when it comes to finding an internship abroad in the United Nations and looking for a good opportunity in PIL. If you have a foreign LLM, make sure you get a very good recommendation from your teachers, because they can vouch for your capabilities at the international level when it comes to studying and writing essays at the same level. So I think a little heads up though, often for foreign law firms and programs at the United Nations, you would require the referees to directly write to the organization as and when contacted. So you must make sure that you have a good rapport with your professors or people outside when you go for a foreign LLM, so that you can let your referees know about this as and when these things come up. For instance, I can give you an example that when I studied outside, I think I kept in mind that my professor of international law and law of armed conflicts was somebody with whom I got along well, and he liked my work and my writing style. Very encouraging professor. And I kept him in the loop through all this. And it was he who actually led me to finding a good fund or a donor actually for my scholarships. I think it's extremely important to have a good rapport with them. And he was very, very generous and understanding in writing about 10 reco letters for me to different people and places. So academics are very, very sweet people. You just have to have a good rapport with them and grab recommendation letters. So very important, and most important, I feel, for a good career opportunity in PIL is recommendation letters. Extremely important.
Okay, Shreya. So tell us about the kinds of scholarships available and like how to apply for those scholarships and like how to go about those scholarships.
Okay, so I think the major problem or hurdle that any public international law student or lawyer from India faces is the funds. That's a bang on point. The problem is that we don't have the money. We may have the education, we may have the expertise, but we don't have the money to actually fund ourselves, go out, stay, because a lot of the intergovernmental bodies unfortunately do not pay. So that's a known fact. But I think I want to start with first letting you all know that a lesser known fact is that paid work is prevalent outside in the field of international law. A lot of organizations do also pay, and that is not very publicized. So I think a very good start before you actually jump into scholarship aspects and criteria is looking for those public international law opportunities which have scholarships or fundings available. I can give you an example. I know for a fact that Three Crowns LLP, like I said, if you just Google Three Crowns LLP, is an internship program which actually has funding available. I know a couple of very good law firms in the UK which are also practicing international law, which have stipends, or these stipends are very, very sufficient in amount, by the way. I mean, they pay you in pounds or euros, which is very good amount for you to sustain yourself, and most of them are very, very benevolent to even fund your air tickets. So it's a very good idea to actually look for all these opportunities that are available before you start figuring out the scholarship criteria with me. Coming back to her question, I think I would say it's a little tough to obtain scholarships, but it's not impossible. I think the funding is very much possible. I am paid pretty darn well, and I must admit it wasn't the toughest thing obtaining the funding. I mean, my funding covers everything right from my stay, my food, my living expenses, my travel back and forth India, and I think it's a very convenient place that I'm in. So I think universities to begin with are a major source of funding when it comes to your jobs and your entry level internships, etc. I think that's a very good place to start from. So if you can convince your university, that's a very good idea to start with. And I know for a fact that GLU this year, I think, was offered from the ICJ an opportunity to come and send some students for traineeships to work with justices. And Justice Dalveer Bhandari, in fact, also had an Indian intern. And I have a friend who's from NUS. She's also currently working at the ICJ right now. She's from the National University of Singapore, like I said. And she also is on a fully funded internship for a year. So when I say internship, it necessarily doesn't mean internship. We call it traineeships here because we're all working in jobs. So we all have a contract with the UN. So there is no concept of an intern or a permanent employment. We're all treated concomitantly. So I'm just going to use the word internship and job interchangeably. So just understand that before I proceed. So I think universities definitely are a great start. Secondly, a lot of programs like the YPP and other UN opportunities are in fact paid. So I think that's a very good system as well. So you can just look for paid opportunities. YPP is paid, Three Crowns is paid, and you can just do a Google search and I'm sure you will find abundant opportunities in public international law which are paid. You have to understand that when you apply for these paid opportunities, you have to tick all the boxes that I told you, whether it comes to a foreign language, whether it comes to a foreign LLM, whether it comes to or boils down to great recommendation letters and foreign contacts. So you have to understand that only if you fill in those criteria will you be actually accepted for a paid internship, because you're competing with European Union lawyers who are actually specializing in international criminal law or international law for that matter for years together. So you have to understand that you have to tick all the boxes that I described above before you actually apply for these funded internships. Also, it's very interesting, but services outside are treated literally like gold. So if nothing, you would be paid an extremely good living cost, inclusive of a stipend. So I think you must remember that it's extremely possible. It's not difficult, but it's doable. Also, there's an Oxford Global Justice Award, which is awarded every year to around 5 or 6 students. So if you're lucky and you're one of them, I think that's also a very great opportunity to start with. So if you're at the University of Oxford and you're studying and you finish your course, there is an extremely bright chance, if you're good at it, of actually being awarded the full money. So I'm as well on this particular award. And what it does is cover all your expenses when it comes to living expenses, food, travel, etc. And it also gives you a very prestigious position in the organization, because people look at you with a sense of respect, and they feel that, you have come with a particular backing, and you have come with a particular knowledge and expertise. And even though you're an Asian lawyer, or even though you're an Indian lawyer, they agree, and they kind of look up to what you say on aspects of international law, which actually is born out of their countries. So I think it's a very interesting sphere to be in, and with a very multicultural environment, it's an extremely lovely experience to be in. Also, it's very interesting, but a couple of days back, I came across a link, and it said that Law Octopus is offering money to students who secure an internship or a traineeship in the European Union Commission or something. And I think that's a very, very noble thing to do, and I think it's a very interesting thing to do. So keep your eyes and ears open and look for these fundings and scholarships. Aspects and criteria are exactly what I told you. Tick all the boxes when it comes to foreign language, LLM, etc. And just keep your eyes open. I think it's not very difficult to obtain a good scholarship. It's really not that bad, the situation outside.
So, Shreya, we have a lot of students who are doing a course who are not from the law background. So, are there any opportunities for people not from the law background?
Okay, that's an interesting question, and I will try and dig my brain deeper to figure out if there are exactly, because I'm a lawyer, so it's a little tricky for me. But it's very interesting, but I should share this with you before I explain it to you. When I was joining on my first day on the 2nd of Jan, I think there were about 5 people from the HR section, 2 from finance, and I think those were quite an interesting mixed bag to see, because yes, intergovernmental bodies definitely are dealing with tribunals on international criminal law or international law and armed conflict, whether it's the Special Tribunal for Lebanon, whether it's the International Criminal Court, whether it's the International Criminal Tribunal for Yugoslavia, whether it's the MICT. All these tribunals also have other divisions and other departments. And yes, those departments need people. Now, a good question would be that most of the times, would they not take their natives or locals? And I would say yes, they would. But I think the other way to look at it is that the fact that Indians are really hardworking, we have a very good reputation of being quite smart and agile outside. And I think that's an excellent way to start from. So if you have a good English language skill, if you have a foreign language and a foreign master's, even if it's not in a law degree, even if it's maybe human resources, finance, economics, it's a very good option. And there are enough avenues available to start from. So I think the other day I'd also come across something from the European Council of Regulations, and it seemed like a great opening to start from. It was a paid traineeship, and I think it's a brilliant opportunity. So there are definitely avenues available for non-law graduates in the international arena. But I think to be very specific, there are a lot of opportunities in the United Nations, especially for non-law graduates. And it's in fact difficult to get into the legal divisions of United Nations, but it's in fact easier to get into other departments as trainees and interns, because it'll give you a very good aspect and an overview of a lot of things which are not done the way it's done in India. So I think that's a very great way to start from. So in India, you have a very limited scope, a very limited way of looking at things, but in abroad, you can actually make out that there are a lot of things to deal with when it comes to figuring out an option for these things. So I think it's a very good idea to start from when it comes to these things. Go ahead, Garima.
Yeah, sure. So, do we have any other tips, like any other points which I missed out asking, which are important to for the opportunities?
Okay, so I will try and give you a brief overview of what I told you and try and tell you exactly how and what we can do. So when it comes to opportunities in public international law, you have to be ready for a lot of travel. I think that's one thing you should always keep in mind. You can have days when you will wake up at like 4 in the morning or 3 in the morning and you have to catch flights at 6. You have to move to Turkey, you're going to Syria. It's crazy. You're going to Bosnia to visit someone. You're having Skype calls with somebody sitting in Arusha, and the time difference in the Arusha is about 2 years. 2 years, I'm saying 2 hours before us. So it's crazy. Sometimes you have to wake up at 6 and start Skyping, get onto a conference call. So, but all this is very interesting. Like, it's very engaging work. It keeps you on your tips and toes. So I think travel and flexibility are two very important tips, are very important when it comes to practicing in international law. So if you're thinking about a career opportunity in public international law, you have to understand that you have to be very careful that you will have to travel a lot. So be prepared for that. The second trip is, I think you have to learn and be open to working and adapting in a multicultural environment. You will have to understand that when you work in an intergovernmental body, there will be people simultaneously present with you from Africa, from America, from Europe, from Asia, and various other places even within the continents. For instance, there will be Chinese, Japanese, Koreans, Indians, Singaporeans, Indonesians. They're all working with you under the same umbrella. And you have to know how to work with them, how to adapt with them, because you'll be working in teams. So your supervisor may be American and she may prefer that, you go in for a detailing and you go in for probably spelling the judgment with the E or without the E. There'll be a European who will be sitting there and who will have an extremely different opinion about the same thing. So you have to be very adjusting and flexible and adaptable to working in a multicultural environment. And you have to be able to accept that there are people from the outside who come with stereotypical ideas about you because you're an Asian. And you have to understand that it's okay to do that, because I'm sure as Asians, we also judge them for being Britishers or Americans at some level. So I think these are very basic things, but nobody talks about it. Knowing the law is not just the only thing, but you have to apply the law. And to apply the law in a teamwork, you need everybody to walk in from different spheres and meet the bridge somewhere in the middle. So I think it's extremely important to even keep that in mind. Another very interesting tip when you work in public international law is a lot of things work on communication. So good communication skills is extremely important when it comes to making a career in public international law. You have to know the nuances of emailing. You have to know how does a European want his email. You have to know how does an American judge want his email. So an American judge might be very casual about things and say, okay, thanks for the draft and appreciate it. But a judge would probably expect, or a Britisher would probably expect you to say, good morning and hope it finds you well, and this is the draft and many thanks for the same. So these are little nuances that you can pick up while you're working, but I would say prepare for these before you go, because once you reach there, I would not want Indians to be judged when we go out there, because people have a stereotype notion about us. And I think the only way to break that stereotype notion is to know about all these things before we reach there and make a brilliant career opportunity in PL. So communication skills is extremely important when it comes to working abroad as a good public international law expert. So that's another tip. I think another interesting tip which I also felt was socializing skills. I think nobody again talks about this, but as Indians, we must learn to socialize with every other person from every other country on the globe. I think a lot of things abroad work on networking skills. So it was very interesting, but I had a friend who was working at the Special Tribunal for Lebanon, and she was from Mexico, and she was telling me this. And she said that she had a friend ahead who was interning with her, and she got along really well with somebody who was working as a trial attorney at the Special Tribunal for Lebanon, and they were working day in and day out on international criminal law and aspects of public international law. And she in fact landed a job with him because they were so well to work with each other, and he offered her a job saying, I really liked what you did over the internship of 6 months and I would like you to join me. So now she's here for another 6 months, and it's brilliant. She is actually an associate there in his team. So everything works on networking abroad. So if you want to find a good career opportunity in public international law abroad, network, that's the key. Another very interesting public international law career opportunity tip would be know the law well, but be adaptable to the fact that the law is still being carved out. So a lot of stuff in public international law has diverse opinions. So while you may have one author or writer saying one thing, you may have another author contradicting it, and you may have a case law of the ICJ which found itself in murky waters and you don't know how to go ahead with it. I can give you an example in criminal law. So international law, criminal law had a particular judgment of Perisic, which was on aiding and abetting in joint criminal enterprises, and this found itself in murky waters at the end of President Merrill, and Judge Liu had a dissenting opinion. And it was very interesting to see which side of the coin are you at. And sometimes, and most of the times, when you're socializing with people over a drink or networking about them for a job, you will get to talk about these things, and these can land you great career opportunities in the field of public international law. So you have to be ready on your feet all the time to know that these can actually land you a job somewhere. If I can dig deeper, I think another very interesting tip when you're actually going in for a career law opportunity, specifically in public international law, which is not there in any other domestic legal jobs, is that you have to be very engaging in your conversation. I think you have to never say no to work. You have to be very, very welcoming when it comes to taking the work, because you have to realize that you're competing with, as an expat, with the locals. So you have to be very, very adjusting and very, very engaging and very, very welcoming to any sort of work that comes your way, be it clerical, be it legal, be it any sort of work to begin with. So I may just have a job of taking out a particular American Journal of International Law article for a judge, but if I do that correctly with the cover page of the journal intact, it just shows him that I have taken care of the fact that I'm not only taken out the article, but I've also taken out the cover page, which has the publication details and everything completely. So I think these are small nuances, and you have to understand that public international law is very fluid. So you're going to have people walking in from different places, like I said. So you have to be very, very on your tips and toes to give them what they want. Think from their perspective and not yours. So you have to know what they want on the table. So if a lawyer who has come from Asia does not know that this is what the judge expects, he must find out that, this is exactly how the judge likes it. He likes it this way or that way. For instance, I told you there are a lot of judges who like their drafts in hard copies. There are a lot of judges in the public international law sphere who read only soft copy because they like to make track changes to it. So you have to know and ask these nuances. A very basic nuance is also know the differences. Like, for instance, I can give you an example. All the filings in India take place on legal sized pages, but abroad there's no concept of that. Abroad there are just filings which take place on A4 sized pages. So this was one of the questions I came up with when I asked my supervisor, and she was quite impressed because she said, nobody asks us these things, but they're so important. So when you come from probably an Indian law school, worked or interned with an Indian lawyer, you would know that there's a legal page on which all the filings take place, but that's not how it happens abroad. So I think once you intern, you will pick things up, but it's important to ask these questions. So whenever you grab that career opportunity in a public international law sphere, it's very important to ask these questions, stop and ask, because you're from outside and you don't want to make any mistakes. So it's a very good idea to ask these questions, I feel, personally. That's all that I can think of at the moment. If you have any more questions, feel free to swarm me, Garima.
Sure, Shreya, that was very informative. I think we're done with the questions. So whatever queries I get from the students, I'll send them as one email to you, and then you can reply and I'll share it. So thanks
Sure,
for your time.
absolutely. Feel free.
Yeah, thanks for your time. It was great talking to you. I'm sure students must have got a lot out of it.
Likewise. Thank you. Have a brilliant day and have a good
Yeah.
weekend, actually.
Yeah. So for us, the day is ending now. So I'm sure it's starting for you. So you have a brilliant day.
Thank you. Okay.
Okay, bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yeah.